All right, well, it looks like we've got everyone through the waiting room, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to PHRC's Fair Housing and Power Hour session on accessibility and fair housing. My name is Brittany Mellinger. I'm the Fair Housing Training and Outreach Coordinator here at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, and I'll be your trainer today. I want to let you know that we are recording this session, and we will send out the link to the recording afterwards, as well as we will send out all of the slides. So that way you will have that resource and you don't need to feel like you need to be writing everything down all at once. All right, so fair housing is the right of all Pennsylvanians. We believe that very strongly at PHRC, and that's why we work to provide a lot of proactive information through our webinars, as well as investigate all fair housing complaints that are submitted to our agency. We know how important housing is and how central it is for both individuals and communities' well-being. I want to let you know what our training goals are for today's session. We have an hour together, so this is not going to be a deep dive into all of the technical specifications. This is designed to be a broad overview to enhance your knowledge of accessibility and fair housing. So we are going to talk about the Fair Housing Act and other laws that do require accessible designs. We're going to talk about what dwellings and buildings are covered by our fair housing laws. We are going to talk about the 7 accessibility requirements. And we are also going to provide information about the complaint process here at PHRC if you believe that accessibility, if a building is not compliant with with the accessibility standards. We are going to share a little bit about some fair housing resources. And lastly, we are going to answer any fair housing questions that you have. So I encourage you to put any questions that you have, any comments in the chat. We'll be asking you to use that pretty frequently throughout today's webinar. So please have your chat window open so that way you can provide answers and engage as we move throughout the presentation today. For those of you who have joined us at other Fair Housing and Power hours in previous months, this next section will be a great refresher, but the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission is the state's leading civil rights enforcement agency. We were founded in 1955, and we have a 2-part mission. So first, to enforce Pennsylvania's non-discrimination laws. That includes the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, as well as the Pennsylvania Fair Educational Opportunities Act. So if someone believes that they've experienced discrimination in any of our subject areas, including housing, they can file a complaint with our agency, and they can have a neutral investigator look into the situation to see if there's a violation of our state laws. But beyond that, we also work to proactively promote fair equal opportunity for all in Pennsylvania. We do that through in-person, virtual education, through events and seminars, conferences. We also work with community volunteers through our advisory councils and our social justice ambassadors that are our volunteers that work to promote awareness of our work and civil rights throughout the state of Pennsylvania. We serve the entire state, so our western region is supported by our Pittsburgh office. The central and northeastern parts of the state, those are covered by our Harrisburg regional office, and then the southeastern part of the state is covered by our Pittsburgh office. We also have a central office that handles a lot of the administrative and outreach functions of the agency. So we are here to talk about housing today, but our agency covers beyond that. So under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, that covers employment, housing, commercial properties, public accommodations, including public services and public businesses such as restaurants, as well as primary and secondary education. Our Pennsylvania Fair Educational Opportunities Act, that covers post-secondary education, such as college, technical school, trade school, things like that. If you want to know more about our agency, you can always check out our website, or you can reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to share information. But we're going to move on to really the meat of our presentation today. So let's talk about fair housing laws and regulations. Let's start with kind of a global overview. What are the goals of fair housing before we get into the technical nitty-gritties? So we talk about fair housing laws as having two goals. The first one is ending housing discrimination, to make sure that discriminatory acts and policies don't limit folks' housing opportunities. But beyond that, there's a second goal, to promote diverse, inclusive communities. We call that affirmatively furthering fair housing. And that's defined as taking meaningful actions in addition to combating discrimination that overcome patterns of segregation and foster inclusive communities free from barriers that restrict access to opportunity based on protected characteristics. So it's acknowledging that, that our country's had a problematic housing past in which all groups of individuals have not had equal access to housing. So there's proactive work that needs to be done in order to overcome the patterns of segregation that currently exist and make sure that everyone can equally access housing. Now, our fair housing laws establish protected classes. So that looks at aspects of people's identity, and folks have protections to make sure that they're not treated differently on the basis of their protected class. Before I advance to that slide to show you what protected classes we have, both at the state level and the federal level, I'd invite you to put any protected classes that you're aware of into the chat. I always like to see how many of these we can capture before I do the big reveal on the slide and show you what protected classes we have. Is anyone feeling brave enough to put a protected class in the chat? All right, thank you, Kelly. Women and children. Yeah, so women would be protected under the protected class of sex, and then children would be under familial status. Race, absolutely. Gender would be under sex, and disability, absolutely. So disability is going to be what our focus is today, since we're focusing on accessibility. All right, so you all did great. There's a couple more that I want to highlight. So at the federal level, there's 7 protected classes. So there's race, color, national origin, familial status, religion, sex, and disability. At the state level, we add 3 additional ones on there. So there's age 40 and above, as well as ancestry, and the use, handling, or training of support animals for disability. So sometimes folks ask, well, what's the difference between ancestry and national origin? So national origin would be the country that you're from, and then ancestry would be the country that your family is from, looking at your ethnicity or your heritage. And I do want to also highlight that we did recently publish finalized regulations that became finalized last year that did offer a further definition to the protected classes of race, religious creed, and sex. And you can find more information on our website about those. But I wanted to highlight that under the protected class of sex, that also covers sexual orientation, gender identity, pregnancy status, breastfeeding status, and more. So it is expansive. So let's talk about our laws. So there's the Architectural Barriers Act of 1968, and this act stipulates that all buildings other than privately owned residential facilities that are constructed by or on behalf of or leased by the United States, or buildings that are financed in whole or in part by the United States, must be physically accessible for people with disabilities. And the Uniform Federal Accessibility Standards, UFAS, is the applicable standard here. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, 1973. So that act as amended, no otherwise qualified individual with a disability may be discriminated against in any program or activity that's receiving federal financial assistance. The purpose of Section 504 is to eliminate discriminatory behavior towards people with disabilities and to provide physical accessibility, thus ensuring that people with disabilities will have the same opportunities in federally funded programs as people do without disabilities. Next, let's touch on the Fair Housing Act, 1968. as amended. So the Fair Housing Act is one of the most well-known fair housing laws, and it provides equal opportunities for people in the housing market, regardless of their disability, their race, color, sex, religion, familial status, or national origin, regardless of whether that housing is publicly funded or not. So Section 504 was specific to public funded properties and programs, but the Fair Housing Act covers more broadly, and that includes the sale, rental, and financing of housing, as well as the physical design of newly constructed multifamily housing. And then the Americans with Disabilities Act, passed in 1990, is a broad civil rights law guaranteeing equal opportunity for individuals with disability in employment, public accommodations, transportation, state and local governmental services, and telecommunication. So Title III of the Act covers all private establishments and facilities that are considered public accommodations, such as restaurants, hotels, retail establishments, doctor's offices, and theaters. And then there's the ADA Amendments Act of 2008. So the definition of disability in this act shall be construed in favor of broad coverage of individuals under this act to the maximum extent permitted by the terms of the act. The term substantially limits shall be interpreted consistently with the findings and purposes of the ADA Amendments Act of 2008, and an impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity need not limit other major life activities in order to be considered disability. And an impairment that is episodic or in remission is a disability if it would substantially limit a major life activity when active. So it really goes into the definition of disability. I want to talk about what buildings and dwellings are covered by the Fair Housing Act accessibility standards. So it covers most types of housing. So in some circumstances, it does exempt owner-occupied buildings that have no more than 4 units, single-family housing that's sold or rented without the use of a broker, and housing that's operated by organizations and clubs to limit occupancy to members. So the design and construction requirements of the Fair Housing Act and the guidelines only apply to new construction of housing that's built for first occupancy after March 13th, 1991. So a building would not be required to comply with accessibility standards if it was occupied on or before that March 13th, 1991 date, or if the last building permit or the renewal of a building permit was issued on or before June 15th, 1990. That gap there was designed to allow time for buildings that were currently in the permit process to be completed before these new standards came into place. So buildings that were built for first occupancy after March 13th, 1991, which fall under the definition of the covered multifamily dwellings. Those include all dwelling units in buildings that are containing 4 or more dwelling units, if such buildings have 1 or more elevators, as well as all ground floor dwelling units in other buildings that contain 4 or more units. So if there's that elevator and there's 4 or more units, then all of the dwelling units need to meet these standards. And then if there is and if there's no elevator, but there's 4 or more units, just the ground floor in those buildings would be required to meet those standards. So the types of dwellings and buildings that are covered are broad. It includes condominiums, single-story townhomes, vacation and timeshare units, college dormitories, apartment housing, and private universities, sleeping accommodations that are intended for occupancy as a residence in a shelter, as well as continuing care facilities or retirement homes. So housing that is not covered by access requirements of the Fair Housing Act, that would include detached single-family houses, duplexes or triplexes, or multi-story townhomes. Now, I want to be clear that the Fair Housing Act does not require any renovations to existing buildings prior to that 1991 date. It's only to the new construction and to the covered multifamily dwellings that meet the definition that we just discussed that were built for first occupancy after March 13th, 1991. And first occupancy is defined as a building that has never been before been used for any purpose. All right, so we're going to talk about the design requirements. So these are requirements for being in compliance with our fair housing laws. So oftentimes when we're looking at accessibility, it's all focused on compliance. What are these technical standards? How do we make sure that we're not out of compliance? But I don't want to lose sight of some of the benefits to housing providers that having buildings that comply with these standards, how that can benefit these housing providers and their businesses. Can you think of anything? Can you think of any reasons why this could potentially be beneficial to housing providers to have these accessible units or accessible buildings? Would you want to venture any guesses in the chat? How could this potentially be a benefit to a housing provider to have accessible housing? Any thoughts? All right. Well, often tenants with disabilities will stay in their housing longer because they have housing that fully meets their needs. That can lead to more income stability for housing providers that might have lower turnover rates than housing that is occupied by other types of tenants. Having housing that's accessible can also lead to having a larger pool of potential renters. So the country as a whole, as well as Pennsylvania specifically, has an aging population. So currently, 1 out of 4 Pennsylvanians are over age 60. According to an article by the ARPPA, by 2030, 1 out of 3 Pennsylvanians will be over age 60. So with an aging population, there's going to be additional needs for accessible housing. As age, their bodies change, and they may need additional features in order to have housing that meets their needs. All right. And thank you so much for everyone that offered comments in the chats. Providing reasonable accommodations. Absolutely, if it's accessible, there may be fewer reasonable accommodations that are needed, incentives to build them into the plans, opening them up into new tenants. Absolutely, more possible tenants, as well as diversity and long-term tenancy. Absolutely, you guys are all on the right track with that. We are going to talk about 7 design requirements under the Fair Housing Act. And we're going to go into all of these in a little bit more detail. So the first one is accessible building entrances on an accessible route. The second is accessible and usable public and common use areas. The third is usable doors. Fourth, accessible routes into and through the covered unit. There's light switches, electrical outlets, thermostats, and other environmental controls that are in accessible locations. Sixth, there's reinforced walls in bathrooms for later installation of grab bars. And then lastly, usable kitchens and bathrooms. So let's look at the first one, accessible building entrance on an accessible unit. So the covered multifamily dwellings must have at least one building entrance that's on an accessible route, unless it's impractical to do so because of the terrain or unusual characteristics of the site. For all such dwellings with a building entrance on an accessible route, there are 6 requirements that apply. So the accessible route, the entrance, that sign with the international symbol of accessibility, the person in the wheelchair, having curb ramps that are installed outside an access aisle unit, level area aisle, as well as the space for the width of the space for the vehicle, and then the loading zone as well. What are some factors that might make this route inaccessible? We talked about the need to have an accessible route, but what might be a barrier that would prevent a route from being accessible? Please feel free to enter any thoughts that you might have in the chat. What might keep someone from being able to access a route, particularly if it's someone that's in a wheelchair or with other types of limited mobility? Steep hills, absolutely. A slope that's too steep is going to be a barrier. What else? Steps, absolutely. When in a wheelchair, a step is going to prevent someone from accessing a route. Anything else? If it's not close to a building, yeah, absolutely. The length of the route could be a challenge. There are two other items that are highlighted. So having blocked access or protruding objects can be a barrier and can prevent the route from being accessible. So doors, particularly if they are not accessible, could prevent that route from being accessible. All right, we're going to go into the design requirement number 2, which is accessible and usable public and common use areas. So you can see the graphic on the screen there. In the grayed out pathways, you can see what an accessible route would look like. It goes into the building, out into any of the common spaces, and allows the person to access all of the key areas within a housing complex. I'd love to invite anyone to put in the chat, what are some common use areas within a housing complex that someone would want to make sure that everyone would be able to access? Anything that you think would be really key? What do you think all folks might need to be able to access within a housing complex, in addition to their units? All right, well, they would need to be able to access the parking lot, right? The entrance to the building. They would want to be, you want to make sure that they can access both indoor and outdoor recreational areas, the lobby of the building, as well as the mailroom or mailboxes. Folks need to be able to get their mail, as well as any laundry areas that are in common spaces. You know, making sure that any area that's a common area is fully accessible. And a community room, absolutely. Laundry room, garage, bathrooms, yes, absolutely. Kitchens, yep. Great comments. Sorry, I think my chat is a little delayed, but I'm seeing all of your comments come in. All right, we're going to move on to design requirement number 3, which is usable doors. That was highlighted in the chat just a minute ago. All doors need to be designed to allow passage into and within all premises. They need to be sufficiently wide to allow passage by persons with disabilities. So these doors that are part of an accessible unit, public and common areas, as well as the primary entrance doors to the covered unit need to be sufficiently wide, which is 32 inches of clear opening. All right, moving on to the accessible route into and through the covered dwelling unit. So there needs to be an accessible route that's into and through the dwelling units, providing access for people with disabilities throughout the unit. So that includes a route through the common areas of within the unit, to the elevator and the hallways, doorways accessible, etc. So you can see in the graphic here, goes into the unit from the main entrance, into the kitchen, into the bathroom, through the bedroom, the dining room, and the living room, and even out onto the wooden deck. So access out into outdoor spaces are covered as well. All right, the next design requirement that we're going to cover is light switches, electrical outlets, thermostats, and other environmental controls. So all premises within the dwelling unit must contain light switches, electrical outlets, thermostats, and other environmental controls that are in accessible areas. So there are a few things that aren't covered under this requirement, such as controls on movable appliances like stoves, controls on range hoods, controls for garbage disposal, special use wall outlets, such as those that are specifically designed for refrigerators and stoves, circuit breaker panels, and telephone and television jacks. But all of the main light switches, electrical outlets, and thermostats, those all need to be reachable. All right, next we're going to talk about reinforced walls for grab bars. So all premises within dwelling units must contain reinforcements in the bathroom walls that would allow for later installation of grab bars around the toilet, tub, shower stall, and shower seat, where such facilities are provided. So the grab bars themselves are not required to be installed. You just need to have the reinforcements, so that way they could easily be added later. All right, and then lastly, I want to talk about usable kitchens and bathrooms. So these dwelling units must contain usable kitchens and bathrooms such that an individual who uses a wheelchair can maneuver about the space. So making sure that there's enough floor space so that way someone can access all of the appliances, the sinks, they can turn around and have that clearance, so they can enter and exit the space appropriately, both in the kitchen as well as in the bathroom. I want to touch briefly on safe harbors. So HUD has determined that the compliance with the following technical standards satisfies design and construction requirements of the Fair Housing Act and its amendments. And you can see the 15 different ones listed there. It's important to note, though, that if a particular safe harbor is chosen for use in a particular property, the housing has to comply with all of the provisions of that safe harbor in order for that to be a safe harbor, to make sure that it does meet those requirements. So you can't pick and choose among the various provisions. You need to have consistency with the whole design standards. All right, I want to talk next about reasonable accommodations and modifications. So if housing isn't covered by these accessibility standards, that doesn't mean that someone with a disability has no right to be able to request changes so they can use and enjoy their housing. Individuals with disabilities do have the right to request a reasonable accommodation or modification that's necessary for them to use and enjoy their housing. I'd love to invite folks to enter in the chat any examples that they know of reasonable accommodations or modifications while I go over the definitions of both of these. So a reasonable accommodation is a provision which allows an individual with a disability to request a change or adjustment to rules, policies, practices, and services when it's necessary to allow the resident with a disability equal opportunity to use the property and its amenities. Now, by contrast, a reasonable modification is a provision that makes it unlawful to refuse to permit residents with disabilities to make a structural change to either the dwelling unit or to the public and common use areas at the resident's cost to allow equal opportunity to use the properties and its amenities. So the distinction is accommodations are when it's a policy, and then modifications is when it's structural. All right, I see some comments in the chat. Wheelchair ramps, that would be a reasonable modification. You're changing the structure. And then closer parking accommodations. If you're designating reserved parking that's closer to someone's unit, closer to an entrance, that would be a reasonable accommodation. That would be changing a policy to allow someone's disability-related housing needs met. Some other examples of reasonable accommodations include allowing a service animal or an emotional support animal when there's a no pet policy in the building, also allowing someone who receives disability-related income to be able to pay their rent on a different date, depending on when they receive that income each month. Reasonable modifications. Another one would include grab bars. It could be a chairlift, a flashing alert for smoke alarms, things like that. Any structural change that you're making to the building. So what can the housing provider require? They can require that the modification is made by a professional and is in accordance with applicable building codes. Like, they can make sure that it's quality work. And they can condition the permission on the resident agreeing to restore the modification back to the original condition, minus normal wear and tear when the resident vacates the unit. They certainly don't have to, but they are able to require that resident to restore it back to the original condition, because the modification might be not be something that would be very useful for a wide variety of tenants. And we have a much more extensive training on reasonable accommodations and modifications I want to mention that goes very specifically into emotional support animals, parking requests, and hoarding, and touches on the interactive process and how to work through issues with that. And I'd encourage you to reach out if you're interested in learning more about that topic, because we can spend a long time on that specifically. But before I move on, I did want to provide some clarification on who pays for the modification. So a housing provider who receives federal funds is required to provide and pay for that structural modification as a reasonable accommodation, unless it amounts to an undue financial burden and administrative burden, or a fundamental alteration of the program. Now, if a housing provider does not receive federal funds, they have to pay for the modification themselves, but the housing provider must allow the tenant to make that modification at their own expense. And there are some sources for funding and financing of reasonable modifications that we'll provide later in the presentation. All right. Apologize, I'm having a little difficulty advancing my slides. I hope that you all can hear me all right. But next, we're going to be talking about the complaint process. Oh, I apologize for having a quick technical difficulty. It's not letting me advance my slides, but I'm hopeful that that this resolves quite shortly. All right, would you be able to let me know if you can hear me in the chat? I apologize, it looks like I may be having some connectivity issues right now. Are you able to hear me okay? Yes, okay, wonderful. I just can't see my slides, which is not the end of the world. Let's talk about the complaint process. So if someone believes that they have experienced discrimination, so if they were denied a reasonable accommodation or modification, if their housing that should be that's covered under accessibility standards is not accessible, it doesn't meet those 7 standards that we talked about, then I can file a complaint with our agency and have that investigated. So they would start by contacting our intake team. They can do that by sending an email inquiry. They can call our team on the phone. They can fill out a form on our website to get the process started. Our intake staff assess the potential complaint to make sure that it's something that we can investigate under our state laws, to make sure that it's jurisdictional to us, and that it's a timely complaint that was filed within 180 days of the act of harm. So if If all of those boxes are checked, they can help the complainant finalize that complaint. The complainant signs it, and then they send it back to PHRC, and that's when it's official. It's an official complaint. It gets docketed and served. So the respondent would then get a copy of that complaint. The respondent is the person who was filed against. So in an accessibility complaint, that might be the housing provider, that might be the developer, the construction company, whoever is would be responsible for that potential violation. And it looks like my slides might be coming back. So once that complainant receives that copy of the complaint, then they would be able to provide a response to that complaint. So they would respond to those allegations and provide their side of the story to the investigator. And then the investigator would work with both parties to get more information. So they may ask for documentation. They may interview the parties. They may interview witnesses. They may hold a fact-finding hearing, or they may seek other ways of obtaining evidence. In an accessibility complaint, they would often come out on site to see what the facility actually looks like. You know, are they does it meet the requirements for the slope of the ramp? Are the doorways wide enough? Can the door be opened? Can you access those facilities? Can you turn around in the kitchen and the bathroom? Things like that. The investigator will also explore if it's possible to settle the case before proceeding to a finding. So this allows them to be able to resolve the complaint in a more timely manner if both parties can come to an agreement. But in many cases, settlement isn't possible, so then the case proceeds to a finding. There can be two potential outcomes to a case. It can be a probable cause, which means that there was enough evidence to establish that discrimination did occur, or there can be no probable cause, which means that there was not enough evidence that discrimination did occur. If there's no probable cause, that really ends the process there. Someone can appeal if they feel like we did not appropriately follow our process, if things were missed. But in most cases, that's where that ends. If there's probable cause, then the case may be conciliated between the two parties, or it may advance to public hearing or be filed in court. So at this point, we're no longer neutral. Throughout the investigative process, we're a neutral party. We're simply trying to assess if there was a violation of our state law. But once that probable cause is found, then our goal is to seek a remedy for the discrimination that occurred. We often get questions about how long it takes to investigate and resolve a case. And unfortunately, there's just a lot of variation in that. So I can't give a specific number of days. It really depends on the evidence, the speediness of responses, and other factors. But it does take a long time to be able to collect all the evidence and make sure that all of the steps are being followed. So what are potential remedies if someone does decide to file a complaint? They can be able to purchase or lease a home or stop an eviction if that housing was previously denied. They can get that reasonable accommodation or modification made. They can get changes to the lease or other policies if there's discriminatory language or policies that the provider has. There may be a requirement to post fair housing notices. And there is typically training required for the respondents to make sure that they are fully aware of our fair housing laws and their requirements under the laws. There may be reimbursement for fees and out-of-pocket expenses that the complainant shouldn't have paid or was forced to pay throughout the process. And then there also may be money for humiliation and embarrassment. So that's the complainant receiving compensation for other costs associated with the discriminatory action, ways that their life was impacted by the discriminatory behavior or policies. And then lastly, there may be civil penalties that are assessed if the case proceeds to public hearing, and that's simply the cost for violating our state law. And you can see a list of recent housing awards here. The top line one for $1.5 million, that's when a housing provider failed to provide accessible units. And then and then ignored requests for reasonable accommodations for tenants with disabilities. There is also a $100,000 case in which case a maintenance worker sexually harassed a female tenant, $90,000 in which a housing provider revoked the lease and failed to address neighbor harassment that was based on race, and $77,000 in which a housing provider made discriminatory statements and refused to rent to a household based on their familial status. So as a wrap up to accessibility, it is unlawful to construct new housing or commercial property that isn't accessible for people with disabilities. And owners are required to make reasonable modifications to accessible buildings or to existing buildings so that they can be accessible when those requests are made by tenants with disabilities. I want to share a couple resources with you. If you'd like further training on accessibility, HUD does provide that through the Fair Housing Accessibility First website. There's written resources, there's trainings that you can take, both in depth as well as shorter overviews. And I also wanted to share some resources on home modification for individuals with disability. The Pennsylvania Assistive Technology Foundation can provide financing for assistive technology, which can include those ramps and stair lifts, things like that. There is also a program at PHFA, the Access Home Modification for homeowners that are purchasing homes and they need those modifications. And then there's also significant variation county to county on what resources might be available. So the United Way 211 can be a great place to start for local information to get you connected to agencies, programs, and resources that are available in your area. Some other resources that are available at our agency. We've got the Pennsylvania Fair Housing Line, 855-866-5718. If you have questions about accessibility or other fair housing questions, we've got trained staff that would be happy to answer your questions. You can be someone who believes they've experienced discrimination. You could be assisting someone who has questions about their rights. You can be a housing provider, a developer, or a municipal official, anyone that has questions on fair housing. Please feel free to reach out through our Fair Housing Line, or you can reach out to me directly. We provide customized fair housing trainings and consultations when requested, in addition to our monthly fair housing empower hours. So next month, we'll be offering a training on affirmatively furthering fair housing, and we'll be releasing further fair housing training topics in the next month. We also have written resources, brochures, and fact sheets. And then we also have a program called PHRC Speaks, Fair Housing in the 21st Century. This is a program that airs on PCN TV on Sundays, and we've got our full back catalog that is on our YouTube channel as well. I also wanted to highlight that we have an upcoming conference. It's called Don't Leave Me Out, Holistic Approaches for Disability Inclusion and Resolving Conflict. You can see the save the date on the screen. It is Tuesday, July 9th. We are offering this conference hybrid, so you can join us in person at the Hilton Harrisburg, or you can join us online, and we'll have more information about this conference in the weeks ahead, including registration. But this is a free event. It'll be a great opportunity to connect with folks all throughout the Commonwealth. All right, the last thing I want to leave you with is our contact information. So you've got both our central office as well as my email and my phone number and our fair housing line. You can also see on the screen, there's a QR code that you can use to get to our feedback survey, which provides information about what you thought about this training, what was helpful, what wasn't helpful, what you want for future trainings, and that's really valuable to us. So I encourage you to take the 2 or 3 minutes it takes to complete that. And I believe my colleague is going to enter the link in the chat as well. So you can see it just popped up in the chat. If that's a little bit easier for you to access than the QR code, please feel free to fill it out that way as well. But we typically leave about 15 minutes for questions at the end. So at this point, I'd love to open it up for any questions that you might have. I didn't see any questions that popped up through throughout the course of this training, but you can feel free to enter anything that you have questions about. It's accessibility or other housing questions that you have, or other questions about our agency. So I will hang on here for a couple more minutes. If anyone does have questions, happy to answer them. But I love to thank you for attending today's Housing and Power Hour, for all of your interaction through the chat and your patience through the technical difficulties in today's presentation. Yeah, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope you join us back again for a future Fair Housing and Power Hour. All right, I am not seeing any questions in the chat. So at this point, I'm going to close this out. You can expect to see our the recording as well as the resource materials in the next few days. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Brittany, I think there is a question.
Oh, is there a question? Could you?
James Reardon.
Could you read that to me? I'm not seeing it on my screen yet.
Sure. James Reardon is asking, a tenant who receives surgery and has to be in a wheelchair for quite some time to recover, does the landlord have to modify the living areas? Do you want me to read it?
So if it's a substantial, if the definition of a disability would be one or more of a person's major life activities that are impacted. So if they're in a wheelchair following surgery and that's going to be an extended recovery time, they would qualify under the definition of a disability. So they could request that reasonable modification or accommodation. So if they are a tenant at a federally subsidized property, if that housing receives funds from the federal government, then the housing provider would be responsible for paying for that modification, assuming that it's reasonable and that it's not an undue burden. If it's a private landlord, then it would be the tenant's responsibility for requesting that modification. They could also explore if maybe a change in unit or a change in policy might be something that could assist them as well if they would need to temporarily move to a different unit instead of, making instead of trying to figure out a way to get up to the second or third floor. It's important to explore all options through the interactive process as well. So great questions, James. Thanks so much for asking that. Are there any other questions that I've missed in the chat?
I do not see any. My
okay, well, thank you so much for raising that question. Okay, good to know it's not just on my end. Well, thank you everyone and have a great day.